the Israeli government is doing everything possible to prevent the emergence of a Palestinian state.
Hello and welcome to this How the Light Gets In morning. Since October the 7th, the world has watched as the conflict between Israel and Hamas has reduced Gaza to rubble, with 85% of the population displaced. For a long-term solution to the crisis, many look to a two-state solution which has widespread international support. But for it to work, the Palestinian state would need to be economically viable and capable of becoming independently successful. But let me start, if I may, with voices from around the panel. Camila, could you talk to us a little bit about how we get to the political economy of Palestine that we have now? What was that trajectory? What has it been?
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation and everybody being here. I think that one of the problems with Palestine is, of course, colonialism. We think about this conflict zone as a war zone, but we forget that it was conquered and basically has been under siege for many years. So if we think about in the long history of colonialism in Africa and Latin America, we see that no colonial country can ever become really viable and stable. For a stable market and transactions and prosperity, you need two things. One is liberty, and the other is security, certainty of laws and rules, and that your infrastructure is not going to be destroyed. So therefore, I would say that the previous attempts at a kind of prosperous and stable Palestine have been thwarted by its colonial characteristics right now, by its moment in a way in history as a colonial state, and the problem of funding. However, I would say that the Palestinian people have been very resilient, because despite all of this, despite not having any liberty and security, they have been able to have industry and prosper within war. So I think this is kind of where we at now in a territory which is under siege for many years and is unable to be prosperous in a way because it's not autonomous.
Camila, thanks very much for that introduction. Nadia, could I turn to you on that?
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you all for coming. Let me just object on what you started with, that it's a Israel-Hamas war. Actually, this is an Israeli war against all Palestinians inside historical Palestine and in exile in the diaspora. So I prefer that we refer to it as a colonial war, and I will explain in a minute. Now, when we talk about a viable state to start with, we need to ask, is this form of a state possible under the current Israeli government? Not the current, but under the colonial rule. It has been since I'm not going to start in 48, I'm going to start 67. Since the occupation of the West Bank and Gaza Strip, the Israeli government made every effort to impede any industrial and agricultural development, leaving Palestinians dependent on Israeli economy. In the post-Oslo period, this was even perpetuated more, especially which relates to the agreement itself that fragmented the land, divided people also under different administrative rules. The land is divided under A, B, C. Let's focus on C area, which is about 63% of the West Bank. This is under complete Israeli control. The Palestinian Authority could get about 14 billion in revenues, in interest from Area C, if and less dependent on international aid, if they control it. But 70% of Area C is off limits for Palestinians. Let me give you a figure. As a result of this dependency and restriction of movement for Palestinians, between January and July 2018, movement restrictions resulted in the loss of around 60 million labor force hours at the cost of $274 million, according to the Applied Research Institute, Jerusalem. Also, the Israeli government is doing everything possible to prevent the emergence of a Palestinian state. Let's see, in Bezalel Smotrich, the finance minister, confiscated from the Jordan Valley area about 12,700 dunams in July this year. The same year, the Knesset passed a law against the emergence of the Palestinian state. This is and by the way, this is not related to the far-right government. While Oslo was underway, settlements increased during Oslo 123 times. And this is according to Peace Now, which is an Israeli peace movement. A final thing, do you know when, and this is to the international community, those countries that recognized Israel as a state lately, Bezalel Smotrich built a settlement for every recognition in the West Bank. The final thing is that why I say this is not Gaza, Israel, immediately in October, I think October 23rd, settlers distributed leaflets to the Palestinians in the West Bank, urging them to leave in an organized matter before a Nakba is brought upon their heads. Okay, and to verify, because I'm an academic, you can Google a Facebook page. It's called Promised Land. It's in Arabic. Somebody can translate for you, and they are asking Palestinians to leave in an organized manner with maps accompanied those calls, where to go and how to leave. Thank you.
Thanks very much for laying out a lot of things for us to think about there, Nadia. Uriel, I'd like to turn to you. I mean, Nadia has mentioned the Oslo process. Just a reminder, I think many here will know, but this very much dominated the 1990s, about 30 years ago now, in terms of the question of whether the Israel-Palestine two-state solution could actually be implemented. During that time, clearly Israeli politicians saw the establishment of a Palestinian state under Oslo terms as having its own economic identity. What did they have in mind, and how realistic was it?
I don't really think that the main goal of the Oslo Peace Accord was the economic viability of Palestine. What Israel wanted and still want, by and large, most Israelis, is safety, security. That's the main thirst, the main hunger. To have security as much as possible, and the way to achieve it was partly through the recognition by Israeli significant others, which is the Palestinians. Now, you may know that in 1988, the Palestinians have declared an independent Palestine. It was 40 years after the State of Israel was declared. And it's very interesting, by the way, to look at the wording of that document, the founding document of Palestine. Mahmoud Darwish, the Palestinian poet, wrote it. And there are a lot of similarities between that and the declaration of Israel's independence. And it was, of course, intentional. I think there are a lot of similarities between those two states. Now, look, we're talking about the economic viability of Palestinian state. Obviously, there is no Palestinian state. 1988 was a declaration. Ever since then, we still don't have that. If you want to get to the reason why we don't have that, then practically speaking, it's American veto in the Security Council. It's almost as simple as that. If the US would decide to lift its veto and to allow for an establishment of a Palestinian state recognized by the Security Council, there will be a Palestinian state recognized worldwide, almost worldwide. Israel most likely will not recognize it, but worldwide it will be established. But if we think about the way that Israeli politics and Palestinian politics have been going on, and I hear the narrative of colonialism, I think there are accurate elements and some elements are really not accurate about it. And of course, there is a distinction between 48 and 67. When do you actually start to speak about those aspects? But I think mostly it's a tragedy that we brought on ourselves. Think about that one moment that was perhaps the most hopeful one for a viable, economically viable Palestinian state. That was under Salam Fayyad, the Palestinian Prime Minister, from 2007 until 2013. Why was that a tragedy? Because that was the most accomplished attempt to actually get there, to build a viable state. But it was a tragedy because Fayad only became prime minister after the violent coup d'etat of Hamas in the Gaza Strip, taking over the Gaza Strip. Now that move enabled Netanyahu, who rose to power, to basically say, well, you know what? Obviously, there is no Palestinian partner for peace. And he began that strategy, long-term strategy, generation-long strategy of basically allying himself with Hamas. And in that form of alliance between Netanyahu and Hamas, what you have is Hamas ruling the Gaza Strip, which is evacuated of military presence up until this war, of course, and settlements. All of these were evacuated. But the goal of Hamas was never to build Gaza Strip. The goal of Hamas was the destruction of Israel, the declared and the practical goal of Hamas. And Netanyahu was using that in order to undermine the Palestinian Authority, the National Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. Divide and rule. That has been Netanyahu's career both in Israel and with regard to outside actors. And so the more moderate forces of the Palestinians were undermined by that government. And what you very well described is the attempt of the messianic element in the Israeli government to take over the Gaza Strip. Many of them see now this war as an opportunity to take over again the Gaza Strip. Unfortunately, I think that we play into their hands if we portray this war as between all Israelis and all Palestinians. No, I think we are, the majority of the people, both Israelis and Palestinians, are held hostage by leaders that are either zealots or just cowards. The majority of Israelis and Palestinians, I can speak on my behalf, being born and bred in Jerusalem, we can live together. There is such a possibility. But the way that the public discourse around this conflict is going on, this sort of gladiators arena, perhaps for the entertainment of some, has been an ongoing bloodshed where I live. I think there is a better way to go about it.
Uriel, thank you very much for, again, leading us off with your thoughts there. Guy, standing as someone who has development experience in the region in terms of what have been the problems, the flaws, the obstacles, the tragedies in the way of that economically viable Palestinian state existing up to now.
Yeah, I was going to begin slightly differently, but following your remarks, I wanted to quote from Netanyahu speaking to the Likud party conference in 2019. And he said, anyone who wants to prevent the establishment of a Palestinian state needs to support strengthening Hamas. That's the Israeli prime minister. And for 15 years, as a former Israeli prime minister said in the New York Times, for 15 years, he was deliberately, through a partnership with Qatar, supplying Hamas with millions and millions of dollars to enable them to continue to have strength.
Yeah, ultimately billions of dollars.
Exactly. And so we have a situation where now we have a finance minister, Smotrich, who is an illegal settler and is allied even further to the right of Netanyahu. But I wanted to start by supporting the thesis that you put forward. I do believe that for many of these people, not you, but many of the Netanyahu people, they genuinely are determined that there shall never be a Palestinian state, right? And they are there in the ascendancy. An opinion poll recently had found that 64% of adults in Israel are against the establishment of a Palestinian state, okay? And that I think is very strong. But I think we must see the context of what's been happening through the prism of the...
To continue watching this video, click the link in the top left or in the description below. Or visit iai.tv for more debates and talks from the world's leading thinkers on today's biggest ideas.